I am Julia Marchetti, 31 years old, and I grew up in a crumbling stone house in the hills above Palermo, where the olive trees were older than memory and poverty clung to families like morning fog. To outsiders, my family embodied Sicilian tradition and resilience. My father, Salvatore Marchetti, worked construction when his back allowed, his hands permanently stained with cement dust. My mother, Rosa, took in washing from wealthy families in the valley, her knuckles raw from decades of lice soap and judgment. But behind our weathered wooden door with its peeling blue paint, our home felt more like a prison of assumptions than a sanctuary of family. I used to climb the ancient fig tree behind our house, counting cargo ships in the distant harbor and dreaming of sailing away from their suffocating suspicions. Even as a teenager, I knew their love came wrapped in fear and accusations. My family weren't just poor. They were poisoned by poverty's paranoia, seeing shame where others saw opportunity. I still remember my 18th birthday vividly, returning from my restaurant job in Palermo to find my parents waiting in our kitchen like inquisitors, my tip money spread across the table like evidence. €200 in one night, my father said, his voice heavy with disgust. What exactly are you serving at that restaurant? The accusation hung in the air like smoke from the wood stove. They never asked about my dreams. They only interrogated my earnings. Every extra euro was suspect, every new piece of clothing evidence of imagined sins. The rest of their energy went to survival, my father's sporadic construction jobs, my mother's endless washing, my older brother Antonio's fishing boat that caught more debt than fish. I can't recall my father ever praising my hard work or my mother trusting my explanations. They had their bitter mantras. Beautiful girls from poor families have only one thing to sell, or money that comes easy goes easier. Over time, I learned to hide my ambitions and stop expecting them to believe in my integrity. The only person who saw my true worth was my nonna, Benedetta Russo, my mother's mother who lived in an even smaller house up the mountain. She was ancient as the olive trees, wise as the stones, and made the best caponata in all of Sicily with nothing but vegetables from her garden and magic in her weathered hands. While my parents counted my tips with suspicion, she taught me the alchemy of Sicilian cooking, how poverty had made our cuisine creative, how necessity became art. Cook with your hands, but season with your heart, she'd tell me in our dialect, teaching me recipes passed down through generations of women who'd fed families with almost nothing. They fear your beauty, because they've forgotten that hunger makes people creative, not just desperate. I treasured those Sunday mornings in her kitchen more than she knew, learning that food was memory, history, and rebellion all mixed together with good olive oil. Everything changed when I was 20. I'd been working at Ristorante Paradiso in Palermo's historic center, not the tourist trap my parents imagined, but a small family place where the chef, Signor Vittorio, saw my potential. He let me help in the kitchen after my serving shifts, taught me professional techniques to elevate the traditional dishes I'd learned from Nonna. I saved every euro, living on staff meals and dreams, planning something bigger than anyone in my family had ever dared imagine. When I had enough for a professional catering license and basic equipment, I made my move. But first, I had to tell my parents. The confrontation came on a sweltering August evening. I'd prepared a business plan, had contracts from 3 small events I'd already booked, even had a letter of recommendation from Signor Vittorio. But my parents saw only one thing, their daughter with money they couldn't explain to their satisfaction. A catering business? My mother laughed bitterly. With what money? You've been saving thousands while we can barely afford bread. I've worked 16-hour days for 2 years, I explained. Every euro is honest. Honest girls don't have this kind of money, my father spat. What have you really been doing in Palermo? What services have you been providing? The words cut deeper than any knife I'd ever wielded in a kitchen. I've been cooking, I said quietly. Learning, saving, planning a future that doesn't involve washing other people's clothes or breaking my back for daily wages. Lies, my mother hissed. Pretty lies from a pretty girl who thinks she's too good for honest poverty. You're selling more than food, and everyone will know it. I left that night with my equipment, my savings, and a heart full of wounds their words had carved. Rented a tiny commercial kitchen space in Palermo with an apartment above it that smelled of previous tenants' failures and my own desperate hope. Started Sapori di Sicilia with business cards printed at a copy shop and a website my friend's cousin built in exchange for free catering. The first months were brutal. Word had spread from my village. The Marchetti girl who'd mysteriously acquired money, who was probably running more than a food business. Potential clients looked at me with speculation, wondering what else might be on the menu. But I cooked through their whispers, let my food answer their unspoken questions. Every arancino was perfect, every pasta alla norma sang with flavor, every cannolo proved that my hands created beauty legitimately. My breakthrough came through tragedy turned to opportunity. A wealthy Milanese couple had booked a famous caterer for their Sicilian villa wedding, but the caterer canceled last minute. Desperate, they called every option, eventually reaching me. The bride was crying on the phone, her perfect wedding collapsing. I promised to save it, worked 40 hours straight, recruited Nana and her elderly friends to help prep. We created a feast that celebrated authentic Sicily, not the tourist version but the real flavors of our earth and sea. The photos went viral. Food bloggers who'd attended wrote rapturous reviews about the young Sicilian chef who'd transformed a disaster into magic. Within a month, I was booked solid. Within 6 months, I was hiring staff. Within a year, Sapori di Sicilia was catering events across Italy, bringing authentic Sicilian cuisine to Milan, Rome, Florence. But my parents remained convinced I was hiding something shameful. The breaking point came when I catered a government minister's daughter's wedding in Taormina. The press coverage was extensive. Photos of me directing my team, quotes about preserving Sicilian culinary traditions, my story of building a business from nothing. The article mentioned my humble origins, and suddenly, everyone in my village knew their accused daughter was actually feeding Italy's elite. My brother Antonio called, his voice strange. Papa's in the hospital. Heart problems. Mama won't leave his side, but they can't afford the treatments. I drove through the night, my new Mercedes eating kilometers, while my heart wrestled with hurt and duty. The hospital in Palermo smelled of disinfectant and desperation. My parents looked older, smaller, diminished by more than illness. My mother's eyes widened when she saw me, then narrowed with familiar suspicion. "Come to show off your success?" she asked bitterly. "Come to help," I replied, pulling out my checkbook. "The doctors say Papa needs surgery. I'll cover everything." "We don't want your dirty money," my father wheezed from the bed. "My money is clean," I said firmly. "Earned by feeding people, creating jobs, building something from nothing but talent and determination. The only dirty thing here is your minds that see filth where there's only hard work." I paid the bills despite their protests, arranged for the best cardiac surgeon, ensured my mother had a place to stay near the hospital. Then I did something more. I brought my team to our village, set up a kitchen in the piazza, and cooked for everyone. Free food, the best ingredients, techniques I'd learned in professional kitchens applied to the recipes these people had eaten all their lives but elevated to art. I wanted them to see, to taste, to understand that their whispers had been wrong. As the sun set over the ancient stones, painting everything gold, my father was wheeled out in a wheelchair, still weak from surgery. He watched me work, saw the respect my team showed me, observed the joy on neighbors' faces as they tasted food that was familiar yet transformed. "That's Nana's caponata," he said quietly, tears on his weathered cheeks. "But different. Better." "Same heart, better techniques," I replied. "Like everything I've done. Taken what you gave me and made it more, not less." The truth emerged slowly. Other successful women from poor backgrounds shared their stories, inspired by my openness. The lawyer who'd been accused of sleeping her way through law school. The boutique owner whose family assumed she had a sugar daddy. The tech entrepreneur whose parents believed she was a high-end escort. All of us had built legitimate success while battling the poisonous assumption that poor women could only rise through their bodies, not their brains and determination. We formed an informal network, supporting each other, mentoring young women facing similar suspicions. Called ourselves Les Honestes, the honest ones, and funded scholarships for girls whose ambitions outgrew their families' imaginations. My parents began their slow journey toward acceptance. My mother started telling neighbors about my recipes, though she still couldn't quite say "my daughter," the successful businesswoman, without wincing. My father, recovered from surgery, would sometimes visit my Palermo kitchen, watching silently as I managed orders worth more than he'd earned in a lifetime. "I was trying to protect you," he said one day, as I prepared appetizers for a celebrity wedding. "From what?" I asked, not stopping my work. "From the world. From men who would use you. From becoming someone who forgot where she came from. But instead, you became the ones who hurt me most. Who assumed the worst. Who saw shame where there was only ambition." He nodded, understanding finally that protection based on suspicion is just another form of imprisonment. The transformation accelerated when I opened my first restaurant in Palermo's historic center, then another in Catania, then Rome. Each location celebrated authentic Sicilian cuisine, employed local women, and proved that tradition and innovation could dance together like old lovers. Food critics called me the ambassador of true Sicily, and my restaurants became destinations for those seeking honest flavors in a world of fusion confusion. But the sweetest victory was smaller, more personal. My mother finally visited my flagship restaurant, wearing her best dress, the one she'd saved for funerals and weddings. She sat at the chef's table, watching me work through the kitchen window. When I sent out the tasting menu, each dish was a memory: her mother's caponata, the pasta with wild fennel weed foraged as children, the almond cookies she'd made for special occasions when sugar was precious. She ate slowly, tears falling onto handmade ceramics that cost more than our old kitchen table. "It tastes like home," she whispered, "but also like the future." "That's what I've been trying to tell you," I said, sitting beside her for the first time in years. "I took our poverty and made it poetry, took our traditions and gave them wings. Everything you accused me of cheapening, I've actually elevated." The business empire grew beyond even my dreams. Sapori di Sicilia became a hospitality group, restaurants, catering, cooking schools, a line of products in supermarkets across Europe. I employed hundreds, many from backgrounds like mine, women who'd been told their ambitions were inappropriate for their stations. My parents lived now in a comfortable house I'd bought them in the village, finally able to rest their worn bodies. They still struggled with pride, with accepting help from the daughter they'd wounded with words sharper than any blade. But slowly, meal by meal, they learned to taste the love in every dish I sent, to see the honor in every success I achieved. The pinnacle came when I was invited to cook at the Italian embassy in Paris, preparing a state dinner for dignitaries celebrating Italian culture. As I directed my team in creating a menu that told Sicily's story through food, I thought of every accusation, every suspicious glance, every moment my parents had chosen shame over support. And I cooked through it all, transforming pain into flavor, prejudice into fuel for ambition. The dinner was a triumph. The President of Italy herself thanked me, praising how I'd elevated humble ingredients into diplomatic tools. Photos showed me in chef's whites, commanding a kitchen that had once seemed as unreachable as the moon to a poor girl from the Palermo hills. My parents, watching on the news from their new living room, finally understood what everyone else had long known. Their daughter hadn't sold anything but exceptional food and harder work than they'd ever imagined possible. "We were poor in more than money," my father told me recently, as we shared dinner at my restaurant, his heart repaired but scarred, like our relationship. "We were poor in imagination, in trust, in the ability to see that beauty and ambition weren't sins but gifts." "Poverty makes people protective," I replied, serving him the rabbit agrodolce his mother used to make, now refined but still recognizable. "But sometimes protection becomes persecution. You were so afraid I'd be exploited that you became my first exploiters, taking my dignity in the name of preserving it. Can you forgive us?" my mother asked, the question she'd been swallowing for years finally escaping. "I already have," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't erase scars. It just stops them from bleeding." Today, I stand at the helm of one of Italy's most respected culinary empires, built on the foundation of recipes whispered by old women and the determination of a young one who refused to let poverty or prejudice define her limits. My story is taught in business schools, the girl from the hills who transformed suspicion into success, who fed Italy's elite while keeping her feet planted in Sicilian soil. Journalists love the narrative arc, the prodigal daughter who proved her worth through work rather than words. But they miss the deeper truth. This isn't just about building a business or proving doubters wrong. It's about the particular burden placed on women who dare to rise, the assumption that their success must be stolen or sold rather than earned. It's about families so wounded by poverty that they wound their own children preemptively, thinking accusation is armor against a cruel world. My restaurants now host daughters and mothers working through their own struggles, sharing meals that bridge generational gaps and cultural wounds. I see myself in young women whose families question their ambitions, whose success seems suspicious simply because it exceeds expectations. I mentor them, invest in their dreams, remind them that the only approval that matters is the one you give yourself each morning when you choose to keep building despite the bruises. Your parents were wrong about the money, one young chef told me recently, but they were right about one thing. You were selling something. Oh, I asked, curious. Dreams, she said simply. You sold us all the dream that we could rise without falling, succeed without shame, honor our roots while growing beyond them. She was right. That's what I'd been selling all along. Not just food, but the radical idea that a poor Sicilian girl could build an empire with clean hands and clear conscience, that tradition and ambition could share the same kitchen, that you could feed the world while keeping your dignity intact. My parents had been so afraid I was selling my body that they'd miss the truth. I was selling my soul's work, one perfect arancino at a time, one catered event after another, building a reputation that no whisper could tarnish. The ultimate irony is that my success allowed my parents the luxury of reflection. No longer consumed by daily survival, they could finally see how their fears had become weapons, how their protection had become persecution. My mother now helps in my cooking school, teaching young women the traditional techniques she'd once thought I was betraying. My father, his heart literally repaired by the money he'd once called dirty, speaks proudly of his daughter the businesswoman to anyone who'll listen. They've learned what I always knew, that poverty's greatest theft isn't money but imagination, isn't food but faith in your children's ability to rise righteously. I am Julia Marchetti. They accused me of doing dirty things for money when all I did was transform dirt, the earth's ingredients, poverty's limitations, their ugly suspicions, into gold through honest work and unstoppable ambition. My parents raised me in fear disguised as love, teaching me that beautiful poor girls had only one commodity. They were wrong. We have the same thing everyone else does: talent, determination, and the ability to build empires from bruises. The only difference is we have to do it while carrying the extra weight of others' assumptions, cooking not just food but proof, serving not just meals but evidence of our integrity. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't proving your parents wrong. It's proving them wrong while still loving them, still feeding them, still honoring the culture they gave you while refusing the limitations they tried to serve alongside it. That's the recipe for success that no amount of suspicion can spoil. And that's the meal I serve every day, in every restaurant, to every young woman who's been told her ambitions must be dirty simply because they're larger than her circumstances. We feast on possibilities now, seasoned with the salt of old tears, but sweetened by the sugar of success earned one honest euro at a time. And it tastes like vindication, served at exactly the right temperature. Hot enough to burn away doubts, cool enough to savor slowly, perfect enough to prove that the only thing we're selling is excellence, wrapped in tradition, elevated by ambition, and delivered with the dignity they tried to steal but never could. Because Sicilian women, like our cuisine, are made of stronger stuff than poverty or prejudice. We take the bitter and make it sweet-sour, take the simple and make it sublime, take the accusations and make them accelerant for ambitions that burn brighter than any shame they tried to serve us. That's not dirty. That's divine. And that's what I've been cooking all along. Proof that you can rise from anything if you're willing to work harder than the weight of others' words, cook better than the bitter taste of suspicion, and serve success with a side of forgiveness that makes even the humblest ingredients unforgettable.